Welcome to The Debate. When analyzing the sociolinguistics of human attraction, we often default to risk-averse communication. We rely on careful textbook phrasing, treating interaction like a fragile ecosystem.
Right, like an ecosystem we are absolutely terrified of disrupting.
Exactly. But the material from Midnight English proposes a radically different framework. It suggests that true psychological attraction fundamentally requires boundary aggression.
Which is a very intense term.
It is. It means the total abandonment of polite, permission-seeking language in favor of claiming absolute linguistic dominance. And I argue that this deliberate violation of social norms is the exact mechanism that sparks genuine desire.
I mean, I look at the clinical reality of human behavior a bit differently. Using textbook politeness might be sterile, sure, but aggressively claiming linguistic dominance is a profoundly dangerous tightrope.
Is it though?
Oh, absolutely. What you call boundary aggression routinely collapses into vulgarity. Seduction requires mutual tension. Dictating the terms of an interaction substitutes a manipulative power play for genuine connection, which is honestly ultimately alienating rather than captivating.
Well, to understand why boundary aggression works, we have to look at the cognitive mechanics of attraction. Think about the standard baseline phrase, something like, "Can I kiss you?"
A classic.
You're permission seeking. It's low risk and therefore extremely low reward. Using textbook politeness in attraction is like trying to start a car by asking it nicely. Attraction is essentially a combustion engine.
Okay, I see the analogy.
It fundamentally requires a spark of friction, a controlled explosion of social norms to turn over. You have to project absolute security, and politeness just dampens that friction.
Yeah, but a combustion engine requires oxygen, not just a spark. When you unilaterally force a dynamic, you suck the oxygen out of the room entirely. A listener hearing this right now is probably thinking this sounds incredibly arrogant.
Or incredibly confident.
No, arrogant. Or even creepy. And they would be right. True charm invites the other person into a shared cognitive space. Boundary aggression doesn't invite, it dictates.
Let's examine the mechanics of that dictation, because I see it as deliberately dismantling the social masks we all wear. Take a concept from the material, like telling someone, "Stop being so innocent, it doesn't suit you."
Wow. Okay, that's bold.
It is. We are biologically wired for pattern recognition. When you violate the expected polite stranger pattern by cutting straight through their facade, it forces a localized adrenaline spike in the brain.
A stress response, you mean?
Well, that sudden neurological confusion is very often recontextualized by the body as arousal. It liberates the partner because it addresses the underlying reality rather than the social performance.
You are framing that as liberation. But psychologically, that is just a hostile takeover of their identity. Telling someone who they are, saying it doesn't suit you, doesn't build mutual charm.
It cuts through the noise.
It strips them of their agency. You are assuming the authority to assign them a role rather than doing the actual work of discovering who they are. Breaking a cognitive pattern is easy. Doing it without violating someone's psychological boundaries requires a sophistication this aggressive approach completely lacks.
But assuming that authority is exactly what generates the heat. It proves you aren't afraid of their boundaries.
That is a very dangerous game.
It is risk, yes. That localized spike of adrenaline is precisely why you must escalate beyond mere authority and introduce genuine linguistic risk. You have to escape the ambiguity zone. Consider the cognitive cliff edge created by an explicit vocalization of desire.
Like what, specifically?
Like stating, "I've got a dirty mind and you're all over it." This transforms potential vulgarity into candid confidence simply by owning the intention outright. It leaves no room for hesitation.
I find that to be a massive, reckless gamble. Publicizing the explicit intent so bluntly shatters the cognitive buildup of tension. Tension fundamentally requires a veil, right? A gap between what is known and what is possible.
Sometimes you need to drop the veil.
But when you lay all your cards on the table and rip that veil down, you cross over into unearned crudeness. You aren't reading the room anymore, you are forcing the room to react to you.
It's a blunt instrument where a scalpel is needed.
Sometimes a blunt instrument is necessary to see if the other person has the fortitude to meet your gaze. If you want to talk about reading the room, look at how the material handles the challenger dynamic with a phrase like, "Don't start something you can't finish."
Ah, yes, that one.
This is absolute linguistic dominance, but it works by tossing the psychological burden directly back to the partner. It creates an explosive friction by implying you are a dangerous variable they might not be equipped to handle.
Notice the crucial difference in mechanism there, though. That specific challenger dynamic relies on the partner having already initiated a boundary crossing.
True, it implies a prior action on their part.
Exactly. It operates as a defensive counterstrike rather than an unprovoked invasion. It maintains the tension without resorting to vulgarity, specifically because it leverages their own momentum against them. It is responsive, not a unilateral dictation of terms.
Which brings us to the core philosophical split of this analysis. We both recognize that textbook politeness is insufficient for generating true attraction.
Yes, we definitely agree there.
But the fundamental disagreement remains. Does claiming linguistic dominance and deliberately invading psychological boundaries spark a necessary biological fire, or does it recklessly burn down the bridge of mutual comfort?
Right. It basically comes down to whether you interpret attraction as a mutual dance of escalating invitations or a sudden, dominant breach of the walls.
And that is the tension we leave with our listeners today. When navigating the sociolinguistics of desire, you must decide your baseline. You have to choose whether you prefer to use language merely to stay warm, or if you are willing to risk the absolute extreme to engineer that combustion.